I gave my parents $100,000, but when I lost my job, they slammed the door in my face. I used to think that family meant having each other's backs, no matter what. That's what I believed while growing up in a small town in Ohio, where folks preached loyalty like it was a religion. But as I found out, not everyone plays by the same rules. By my late 20s, I had done well for myself. I worked for a big tech firm in Chicago, pulling in a six-figure salary. Not millionaire money, but enough to live comfortably, enjoy a few luxuries, and, most importantly, help out my parents. They weren't broke, but they weren't thriving either. Their mortgage was bleeding them dry. Medical bills kept piling up in retirement. That was a fantasy. At first, I helped out here and there, paid off a credit card one month, covered their heating bill the next. But the more I gave, the more they needed. It started small, just a few $100s, but before I knew it, I was wiring them thousands each month. Not just for bills, either. Groceries, car repairs, even Mom's impulse shopping habits. She had a taste for good deals that somehow always drained my account. I should have set limits, but how do you say no to family? Every month, I sent the money without fail. Rent, utilities, groceries, even their Netflix subscription. I covered it all. And at first, it felt good, like I was doing my duty as a son. They said thank you in the beginning, but over time, the gratitude faded. My bank statements became their expectation, and that's when I realized something. I wasn't helping them. I was their safety net, their financial crutch, and they didn't even notice. They never asked if I was doing okay. Never wondered if I had my own struggles. It was like they saw me as a never-ending ATM. No calls just to check in, only to ask for money. And I gave it, over and over, because that's what a good son does, right? I started feeling the weight of it. My own savings were taking a hit. My stress level spiked, and I found myself hesitating before swiping my card at the grocery store, even though I was making more than enough money. It wasn't about what I could afford. It was about what I wasn't allowing myself to enjoy. Every dollar I spent on myself felt like a betrayal to them. And then there was the guilt, the unshakable, ever-present guilt. I knew that if I cut them off, they'd struggle. Maybe lose their house. Maybe have to downgrade their lifestyle. But why did it feel like I was the only one sacrificing? Why was I losing sleep over their problems, while they were out there living like my money was an endless supply? It took me years to realize that generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's a slow bleed. But I didn't get that back then. I figured, hey, they're my parents. If I ever needed help, they'd do the same for me, right? That's what I thought, until I made a mistake. I thought that if something ever happened to me, they'd have my back, that they'd be there, just like I was for them. But when the time came, when I needed them most, I learned the truth the hard way. And that's when everything changed. Losing my job wasn't just a setback. It was a gut punch, the kind that knocks the air out of your lungs and leaves you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering how the hell everything unraveled so fast. 1 minute, I was thriving, big city job, solid paycheck, a comfortable routine. The next, I was sitting in a conference room with a bunch of other shell-shocked employees, listening to some corporate suit throw out words like downsizing and restructuring. The company was going in a new direction. Translation, they didn't need us anymore. Just like that, I was unemployed. Panic set in immediately. Rent, bills, the money I sent my parents every month. How was I supposed to cover it all? I had some savings, but watching my balance shrink instead of grow made my stomach twist. I dusted off my resume that same night, fired off applications like a man possessed, but deep down, I knew the job market was brutal. Finding a new position that paid even close to what I had before, it wouldn't happen overnight. For the first time in years, I had to think about cutting expenses. No more fancy coffee on the way to work. No more Uber rides when I could take the train. No more ordering takeout just because I was too tired to cook. But even then, the numbers didn't add up. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called my parents. I didn't even consider how they might react. I had been their safety net for years. Surely they'd have my back this one time. When my dad picked up, I explained everything, trying to keep my voice steady, pretending I wasn't already spiraling. He listened, made the right noises. That's awful. Can't believe they did that to you. But then came the part that really hit me. They didn't offer to help. Not even a little. Instead, my mom chimed in with, "Well, that's rough, but you'll figure it out. You always do." I waited for the but. Some kind of reassurance that they'd be there for me. Maybe a casual offer to cover my rent for a month, or even just send a couple $100 to help with groceries. Something. Anything. But no. That was it. Tough break, son. Hope things turn around. I hung up, staring at my phone, feeling like an idiot. Years of support. Thousands of dollars. Gone without a second thought. I wasn't expecting a blank check, but I had at least thought they'd show some concern. Maybe ask if I needed anything. Instead, it was like I had called an old coworker, someone who barely knew me, someone who felt bad but not enough to actually do anything about it. And that's when it hit me. Hang in there was all I was ever going to get. Months passed, and things only got worse. The job hunt was brutal. Every rejection email felt like another kick to the ribs. My savings? Gone. My credit cards? Maxed out. I wasn't just broke. I was drowning. Rent was overdue. Bills were piling up. And the fridge was practically empty. The safety net I thought I had, it had been an illusion all along. I didn't want to ask my parents for help. I had too much pride for that. But pride doesn't put food on the table or keep the lights on. So, after staring at my phone for a solid hour, I finally dialed. I kept it short, told them the truth. I was in trouble. Just a little help, enough to get by until I landed something. Maybe a loan, maybe a place to stay for a while. Anything. They didn't even hesitate. "Oh, honey, we're really struggling too right now." My mother's voice dripped with concern, but there was something off about it. Things are just so tight. You understand, right? I sat there, gripping my phone, listening to them tell me how bad things were for them. But something wasn't adding up. Because last week, Mom had been raving about a new spa membership. Dad, he had just bought himself the latest smartwatch. And didn't they just trade in their SUV for a brand new luxury model? Struggling? Really? I wanted to believe them. I wanted to think they genuinely couldn't afford to help. But as my stomach growled and I stared at the final notice on my rent statement, I started wondering if maybe, just maybe, they just didn't want to help me at all. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just uncomfortable talking about money. Maybe they assumed I'd be fine, that I'd bounce back like I always did. But as days turned into weeks, it became painfully obvious. They weren't struggling. They were fine. More than fine. Mom was posting pictures of her girls' weekend in Napa Valley. Dad was showing off his new golf clubs. They were living their best lives, completely unbothered by the fact that their son was barely scraping by. So I tried again. I asked if I could crash with them for a bit, just until I got back on my feet. Their answer? "Oh, sweetheart, you know we'd love to, but we just don't have the space right now." Space? In their 5-bedroom house? The same house I helped pay off? That's when it hit me. They weren't saying no because they couldn't help. They were saying no because they didn't want to. I hung up and just sat there, staring at my phone like an idiot. For years, I had been their safety net, making sure they never had to worry about money. But now that I needed them, I was on my own. And that's when I knew. Family doesn't always mean support. Sometimes it just means obligation. And I was done being the only one holding up my end of the deal. I couldn't let it go. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had given them everything, more than $100,000 over the years. Paid their mortgage, covered their bills, even threw an extra so they could enjoy their lives without worrying. And when I needed them, Nothing. Not even a temporary place to stay. I had to hear it from them directly. I called again, this time without any pleasantries. I laid it out in plain terms. I reminded them how much I had given, how I had made sacrifices for them. And then I asked the question that had been eating away at me. Why can't you help me now? Just a little, after everything I've done. Their response knocked the wind out of me. Well, we never asked for that money. That was your choice. It took me a second to process what I had just heard. My mother's voice was calm, almost dismissive, as if I had just reminded her of some minor inconvenience. My father chimed in, echoing the same sentiment. According to them, my financial support had been a gift, not an obligation. Something I did because I wanted to, not because they needed it. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All those years, I had believed I was doing the right thing. I thought I was stepping up, being a good son, making sure my parents never had to struggle. But in their eyes, I had been a fool, just someone willing to throw money at them without expecting anything in return. I could barely speak. My hands were shaking. All I managed to get out was, "So you never actually needed the money? You just took it." Silence. Then my mother sighed. "Honey, it's not like that. You wanted to help. We didn't stop you. Didn't stop me." That was their justification? They let me bleed myself dry, knowing full well they didn't need it. And now, when I was at my lowest, they had nothing to offer but a weak excuse. I sat there, stunned. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what it meant. I wasn't their son. I was a financial resource, a bank account with a pulse. And the moment that account ran empty, I was no longer useful to them. I replayed every moment in my head, every time they called, every time they hinted at their struggles, every time I sent another wire transfer thinking I was doing the right thing. It had never been about necessity. It had been about convenience. They had played the role of struggling parents so well, I had never even questioned it. I thought about the vacations, the new gadgets, the luxury car in their driveway, the subtle bragging about the latest home renovation projects. And all the while, they let me shoulder their burden like it was my responsibility alone. The realization hit like a freight train. I had been nothing but an open wallet to them. I felt the anger burning in my chest, but underneath it, something worse. A deep, hollow ache. The kind of pain that comes when you realize the people you love don't see you the same way. They weren't just refusing to help me. They were never planning to help. Ever. But the worst part was still coming. Because they weren't just refusing to help me. They were about to do something that would make everything even worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they just didn't understand how bad things had gotten. Maybe they thought I was exaggerating. Maybe if they really saw me, they realized this wasn't just some rough patch. I was at rock bottom. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I packed a small bag, scraped together just enough for gas, and drove to their house. The same house I had helped pay off. The same house I had assumed would always have a place for me. It was a long drive, and the entire way there, I ran through different scenarios in my head. Maybe they'd be surprised but welcoming. Maybe they'd sit me down, talk things through, realize how selfish they'd been. Maybe they'd finally step up just this once. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I knew I had made a mistake. The first thing I noticed, the brand new SUV sitting where my dad's old car used to be. Leather seats, chrome finish. Definitely not the vehicle of people who were struggling. The second thing, the perfectly manicured lawn, the new porch furniture, the expensive potted plants lined up neatly by the door. This wasn't the home of people who couldn't afford to help their son. This was the home of people who had never even considered it. I knocked, and when the door opened, my mother stood there, looking at me like I was a stranger. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, she let out a small, exasperated sigh. "Oh, what are you doing here?" That wasn't the reaction I expected. No hug, no concern. Just pure, immediate discomfort. Like I was a problem showing up at their door. I told them the truth. I had nowhere else to go. I wasn't asking for much, just a place to stay until I could find my footing again. A couch, a spare bed, anything. My dad appeared behind her, arms crossed. You should have called first. I blinked. Called first? Like I was some salesman knocking on their door at dinner time. My entire world was collapsing, and they were worried about a heads up. I told them I had called. I had asked for help, and they had brushed me off. My mother shifted uncomfortably, then glanced over her shoulder into the house. I realized something then. She didn't want me inside. She wasn't hesitating because she felt guilty. She was hesitating because I was an inconvenience. She forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Sweetheart, we can't have you stay here. It would be too complicated. Too complicated. That was the word she chose. Not impossible. Not we don't have space. Just complicated. I had given them everything. And now that I needed something, anything, they were turning me away at the door. My dad shifted his weight, looking down at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Maybe you should try a shelter or something. Just until you get back on your feet. A shelter. My own father was suggesting I go to a shelter. After all the years of making sure they never had to struggle, after every sacrifice I had made, they were acting like I was some random guy off the street asking for a favor. I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. This wasn't my family. These were just people who had used me for as long as they could. And now that I wasn't useful anymore, they had no problem shutting the door in my face. I took a step back, nodding slowly, letting the realization sink in. I stood there, still processing what had just happened. The people who raised me, the ones I had sacrificed so much for, were now looking at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I had thought, even after everything, that deep down they still cared. But the truth was staring me in the face. Maybe I was naive, but I had to try one last time. I steadied my voice and asked them, just one more time, for any kind of help. It didn't have to be much. Some food, a few nights in the guest room, anything to show that I wasn't completely alone in the world. My dad didn't hesitate. His voice was firm, almost annoyed. You're a grown man. Figure it out. That was it. No sympathy, no hesitation. Just a cold dismissal. Like I was some stranger asking for a favor instead of their son, the one who had made sure they never had to worry about money. I looked at my mom, hoping for something, some small sign that she disagreed, that she saw how cruel they were being. But she just looked away. She wasn't going to fight for me. Maybe she never had. A part of me wanted to scream, to force them to see what they were doing. But I didn't, because I finally understood. It wouldn't matter. They didn't see me as their son anymore. I had been a wallet, and now that the money was gone, so was their interest in me. I turned and walked back to my car, feeling a numbness settle over me. It wasn't anger, not yet, just a hollow, sinking feeling in my chest. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the house I had helped pay for, the one I assumed would always be a place I could return to. It looked different now. It wasn't home. It never really had been. And then it hit me. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not my time, not my concern, not my love. They had made that choice for me. I started the engine, gripping the wheel tight, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. They had shut the door on me, and I was finally ready to do the same to them. As I drove away, something unexpected happened. The numbness started to fade, replaced by something else, relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for them anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their problem solver. I was free. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For years, I'd been stuck in a cycle of guilt, obligation, and blind loyalty. But once I let go, my life started to change. I found a new job, not as high paying as my last one, but it was steady, and more importantly, it was mine. For the first time in years, every dollar I earned stayed in my pocket. No more secret resentments. No more waiting for a call asking for more. It was liberating. Without the weight of their expectations, I started making decisions for myself. I moved to a new city, found a small apartment, and slowly rebuilt my life. I made new friends, people who didn't see me as a walking ATM. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for their approval. Then one day, my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in a long time. I let it ring once, twice. Part of me already knew why they were calling. Curiosity got the better of me, so I picked up. It was my mom. Her voice was different, strained, hesitant. I knew that tone. It was the same one I used to have when I had to break bad news to them. They had money troubles, bad ones, some bad investments, unexpected expenses, and now they were struggling to make ends meet. They needed help. For a moment, I almost laughed. The irony was too perfect. The people who turned me away at my lowest were now asking me to bail them out. I let them finish their speech, let the desperation sink in. I imagined them standing in their expensive house, surrounded by all the things my money had helped them buy. And then I took a deep breath and repeated the words my father had said to me not so long ago. You're grown adults. Figure it out. Silence on the other end. I could almost hear the disbelief, maybe even a little anger. But I didn't stay on the line long enough to listen to their excuses. I just smiled into the call and put my phone down. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free.
Bye bye.